U.S. officials are warning that Russia could be preparing for some kind of biological or chemical attack in Ukraine. Some journalists are warning that Russia could take control of biolabs in Ukraine and release deadly pathogens and then blame the U.S. for it. That comes from CBS. Meanwhile, NATO has amassed 30,000 troops and 50 warships near Russia for a war game. And they're saying, don't worry, Russia, this is just all one big training exercise. Now, that's all happening, and there's a real fear of some kind of World War III. I do think it's fair to say we're in some kind of World War III, but people keep looking back at history to determine whether or not we are in a predicament. Modern warfare will not look the exact same as it did 100 years ago, so it's hard to know exactly what's going on, especially with the fog of war, and especially with propaganda. Which brings us to our main story. While many of you have been wondering about, is there a World War III in Eastern Europe? Many of you have been thinking to themselves, weren't we on the verge of some kind of civil war? Both are true, I suppose. The View on ABC. Their hosts entertained the idea, and they called for a DOJ investigation of Tulsi Gabbard and Tucker Carlson, saying that they used to arrest people for doing stuff like this and the DOJ should look into them. Now, I wrestled with the idea of saying they're actually calling for the arrest because they didn't literally come out and say they should be arrested. But I think they're trying to dance around the issue. What would a DOJ probe be for? What would the purpose of a DOJ probe on Tulsi or Tucker, what would the purpose be? Well, they're doing a criminal investigation, right? And then they say they used to arrest people for doing stuff like this, right? Yeah, they're implying they should be arrested. Why? Because they're pushing pro-Russian propaganda. Well, hold on there a minute. Tulsi Gabbard addressed what Mitt Romney said about biolabs. Tulsi Gabbard said, these come from U.S. government sources, and you have CBS making these claims. You see, therein lies the terrifying picture. It's not about whether or not there are biolabs. There are. It's not about whether or not the U.S. is funding them. Okay, that's questionable because we don't know exactly who's funding what where. We know the U.S. does have some funding of some biolabs. Getting specific is more difficult. It's not a question of that. It's a question of, do you support the establishment machine? Do you support the narrative? Are you pro-war? Will you challenge the U.S. establishment? At the same time, Jen Psaki's coming out making claims about Russia hacking the 2016 election. You can see this is what we call the hierarchy. The establishment left, mainstream corporate press can say whatever they want, regardless of the facts. The issue at hand is, are you with us or are you against us? And now we have a very real prospect, and you need to listen to this. To all the people who would dismiss it, pay attention. The View, ABC, Disney, mainstream corporate press, at the very least, advocating for the idea we arrest a former member of Congress and a pundit over their opinions on warfare. Realize that to get from point A to point B, which point A is a free society and point B is totalitarianism, you need to have that gradient. You need to have those points in between. A better way to say it is, a lot of people see us at point A, freedom, to a certain degree. Maybe we're at point B already, losing some of that. And point Z would be that great authoritarian regime. And they say, we're too far away, we're not going to get there. Then you should be worried about ABC's The View advocating for the arrest, prosecution at the federal level of high-profile American personalities who say, I dissent. The Daily Beast even calls it Red Scare 2.0. Yeah. Pointing out or calling out people who say things that don't line up with the establishment, and then calling for their arrest. Let's read this. And I want to show you. The scary thing about this is that Tulsi is actually correct. And what she's saying isn't being disputed by the officials. She's simply an opposition figure. These same people at The View, or people like them, would scream that Vladimir Putin is locking up protesters and locking up his opposition, and then with a straight face turn around and say, you should lock up ours. Dark days indeed, my friends. Let's read the news, and I'm going to talk to you about what the current level of tension is in Russia and Ukraine and the fears of these chemical attacks. But The context is what's happening here in the US. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com and become a member in order to help support our work. As a member, you're keeping all of our journalists employed and funded, because that is basically how we fund the entire operation. It's through memberships. You'll also get access to exclusive members-only podcasts from Timcast IRL and our other shows. But don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this channel, share the show with your friends. Let's read the news, see what's going on. The Daily Beast reports The View wants DOJ to probe Tucker and Tulsi for Russian propaganda. After Navarro said the DOJ should look into people who are shilling for Putin, Whoopi noted they used to arrest people for doing stuff like this. Several hosts of The View on Monday suggested the Department of Justice investigate Fox News host Tucker Carlson and former Democratic Rep Tulsi Gabbard for peddling Russian propaganda, with one panelist even noting how in the past such transgressions have resulted in arrest. I'd say that's a veiled call. They're outright saying that if you ask for a DOJ probe into a person, what's the point? So they can come out later and say, hey, those opinions you have, we agree with them. Have a nice day. No, the Department of Justice, it's a criminal investigation. In recent days, both Gabbard and Carlson have been proponents of the theory the United States is developing dangerous bioweapons in Ukraine, a centerpiece of a Kremlin disinformation campaign to justify the invasion of its neighbor and potentially blame a Russian chemical attack on a false flag operation. Clips of the ex-lawmaker on Carlson's show discussing bioweapons in Ukraine have been showcased across Russian state media, alongside the Fox News host saying Russian disinformation is true. Furthermore, it was reported this weekend that Moscow has pushed the state-controlled press to promote Carlson as much as possible because he sharply criticizes the actions of the United States and NATO. While Republican Senator Mitt Romney calling out Gabbard on Sunday for parroting false Russian propaganda that may well cost lives, the women of The View took turns on Monday describing the former Democratic presidential candidate and the Fox News star as apologists for Russian President Vladimir Putin. I think Tucker Carlson takes things a little too far in a certain sense. I think he gets a lot of facts right, but maybe pushes them a little bit more than I would be comfortable pursuing. But I think he's better than Hannity. I think he's better than the mainstream press. You see, the problem is Tucker Carlson wants answers on why we should be involved in this war. Tulsi Gabbard, of course, opposes U.S. interventionist policies. I also think getting involved in these wars is a big bad idea. That is what separates Tulsi Gabbard from the CBS News journalist, for instance. And I'll show you those clips. So let's read more. Quote, I think Mitt Romney is absolutely right, by the way. So what this is the Russians are spreading propaganda to try and create a pretext for potentially using chemical weapons against the Ukrainians, said conservative guest host Alyssa Farah, a former Trump official who is now a CNN contributor. They're parroting what Tucker Carlson parrots on Fox News, and Tulsi Gabbard is saying it's helping them get away with acts against Ukrainian civilians. I honestly don't think it is. But think about the context here, the prospects here. What does she mean by this? Tulsi Gabbard is anti-war. She doesn't want us intervening. How is what she's saying helping Russia get away with it? The only way Tulsi Gabbard's criticisms would help Russia is if it inhibited the US or NATO from intervening and getting involved in that war, which we're not supposed to, right? I mean, that's Tulsi's goal. No, it seems the only way that Russia gets away with what they're doing is if the US isn't involved in any way. I'm not saying direct ground involvement. So that's what they're implying. Co-host Ana Navarro weighed in imploring the Fox board of directors to step in and say, we cannot be Russian state TV. Money. Liberal co-host Joy Behar chimed in. Is it money? Hostin replied. Who's paying him that money? I'm not making any allegations, but it doesn't make sense that he would do this kind of thing. I mean, he also says the United States helped encourage the Russian invasion. Helped encourage. I'll put it this way. The U.S. and Russia are at odds and in conflict. They have been for a very long time. It involves Syria. It involves gas pipelines. It involves Ukraine. The U.S. was winning this conflict and doing things I typically think are very bad. Russia, knowing they were losing an influence campaign, decided to intervene with hot conflict, kinetic force. It's resulting in civilian destruction. I think ultimately Putin lost and he's in the wrong here. I don't like the U.S. administration. I don't like the establishment. I don't like U.S. imperialism. But if the game is we're going to fund politicians we like and put pressure on countries by use of money and influence, it's infinitely better than hot conflict. Putin is losing. I think it's all bad, to be completely honest. But if I had to make a choice between influence, conflict, propaganda, and hot war, I'd take the influence. And the truth is, a lot of people in Ukraine are happy with what's going on. Again, not a fan of the conflict and manipulation. I believe Ukraine, Syria, and any other country should be left to their own devices and self-determination. I digress. Asserting that Carlson isn't just getting dropped by Fox News, Navarro went on to urge the Justice Department to probe Carlson, Gabbard, and others. I wonder who those others could be. I think DOJ, in the same way that it is setting up a task force to investigate Russian oligarchs, should look into people who are Russian propagandists and shilling for Putin. If you're a foreign asset to a dictator, it should be investigated. And in fact, I remember when Tulsi Gabbard, and I hate that we're discussing it because I think to myself, who is this woman? She's a failed presidential candidate. She only practically exists on Twitter. And if that's correct, we're giving her oxygen is what makes her relevant. But we are talking about her on hot topics. On the other hand, how do you not call out something that is repeating false Russian propaganda and that has been brought down? Moderator Whoopi Goldberg, meanwhile, took Navarro's suggestion several steps further. They used to arrest people for doing this stuff. Did they? If they thought you were colluding with a Russian agent or putting out information or taking information and handing it over to Russia, they used to investigate stuff like this. And I guess now, there seems to be no bars and people are not being told to hate Putin. Putin doesn't need a reason to be hated. It's pretty much clear. Well, I'll give him that one. I think there's real reason to criticize Vladimir Putin. I do not like the man. I think he is a terrible leader. And I think it's evidenced by the fact that he is losing control in Eastern Europe. When we take a look at what the US and NATO does, what they're doing in countries like Ukraine and Syria, and we look at what Vladimir Putin is doing, by all means, you can criticize the United States. Putin is losing. He's been losing for over a decade. He maintains a stranglehold over Russia. In Russia, activists get arrested for speaking out. The dude clearly has no grasp of how to run a country, how to combat information warfare. And he's losing on all of those fronts, resulting in urban conflict, which leads to civilians dying. The dude's a terrible leader. Oh, I know. So is Joe Biden. Look at gas prices. Look at everything that's happening. It's a bunch of failed leaders punching each other in the face, I guess. I don't like any of them. I don't see a reason in any way to justify what Russia is doing. And I don't think Tucker Carlson necessarily or Tulsi Gabbard wants to do that. In this tweet thread from Tulsi Gabbard, which I highlighted in a previous segment, but I'll briefly go through now, she calls out Mitt Romney this morning, highlighting a few important points. The Pentagon fact sheet, March 11, 2022, has numerous statements directly and indirectly confirming the existence of biolabs. The U.S., through the Biothreat Reduction Program, has invested approximately $200 million in Ukraine since 2005, supporting 46 Ukrainian laboratories, health facilities, and diagnostic sites. We then have this tweet. I believe this is not it. Here we go. Face the Nation. CBS Dave Martin says a Pentagon official he talked to this morning said there is no movement of chemical weapons into Ukraine, but the concern is that Russia may move to seize a biomedical research facility, weaponize a pathogen, then blame it on Ukraine and the U.S. So at least according to media.defense.gov, there is funding of biolabs in Ukraine. They say right here, this is defense.gov, okay? The U.S. through the Biothreat Reduction Program, I believe it's program. Is it? Yes, Biological Threat Reduction Program has invested approximately $200 million in Ukraine since 2005, supporting 46 Ukrainian laboratories, health facilities, and diagnostic sites. PTRP has improved Ukraine's biological safety, security, and surveillance for both human and animal health. Now, let me slow down there a minute. I am a reasonable person. I don't want to accuse the U.S. of funding biological weapons research if that's not what we're seeing. From this fact sheet, the U.S. is seeking to make these facilities safer. But that does mean the U.S. is cooperating and has helped build, this is a fact, two biolabs. Now, these two labs, it's been reported, or actually we pulled up the U.S. Embassy website, .gov, another one. These are food protection and consumer goods protections. But the U.S. is funding 46 different labs. What are these labs doing? That's the question that we have. Now, Russia and China are claiming that these are bioweapons facilities and the U.S. is involved in them. Maybe. I don't know. I'm not going to accuse the Russian of doing that. I think certainly every player here has a reason to lie. Russia and China want to justify Russia's invasion of Ukraine, so they'll exaggerate to the most dangerous or absurd degree. The U.S. obviously would want to deny any of that because Well, you don't want to do things that are wrong or be accused of actually doing some kind of illicit research, so they'll deny. The reality is the labs exist. What's going on? The people don't know. I'm not going to sit here and play games with Russia's assessment. I think Russia's lying. I think there's a good chance there's pathogen research here. That's what we're hearing from CBS. I think there's a good chance Russia would cause damage to these facilities in the process of their invasion, and then they'd blame the U.S. I think it makes perfect sense. I also think it's fair to say the U.S. is probably doing screwed up stuff. The reality is it's war, man. Now, I can sit here as an American and just be like, America can do no wrong. I don't care. America does lots of wrong, and I'll call them out if they do. What I want to know is the truth. That's what I want to know. Meanwhile, here's a video from Julia Ioffe. Can someone please subtitles for this incredible video that shows modern Russia in its quintessence? It's a video showing a woman talking about why she doesn't like the invasion. She gets arrested. Another woman walks up and says she supports the invasion. She gets arrested too. Yeah. Arresting dissidents who are standing around in the street, who are simply talking about ideas, is bad. Truth be told, I don't know the full context of these videos. For all I know, this is an area where they were like, we've got a security threat, we're locking it down, please move quickly. And they're taking these people not to arrest them, but to just kick them out. I have no idea. I think it's very likely Putin is just, arresting these people. That seems to be particularly likely. Let's talk about this double standard, though. Jen Psaki told TikTokers that Russia hacked our election here. That's not true. Absolutely not true. They didn't do that. There may have been some small-scale things. Of course, Russia plays influence games, but for the most part, it's a lie. It's just, these are the games they play in terms of propaganda. If you support the establishment, you can make these claims. If you oppose them, you can't. I can't say I'm surprised to see The View effectively calling for the arrest of dissidents in this country. But are we going to sit back and just entertain these overt and outright lies? I highlight the Jen Psaki thing because I think it's fascinating that she would say that to TikTokers. It shows you the power of the establishment, how they're willing and able to bend the rules and get away with what they want. It shows that these are the people who claimed Trump saying Hillary should be arrested over the emails. We can't have that. They're now doing the same thing. I think it's a combination of things. It's a combination of international and internal conflict. And we'll expand upon this. Fox News. This was a shocking story to me. Parliament of NATO country Estonia calls for immediate establishment of a no-fly zone. There's not really airstrikes taking place, as far as I know. But a no-fly zone is an effective declaration of war. We now have the first NATO member to formally call for the implementation of a no-fly zone amid Russia's war in Ukraine. This is why you need to understand the propaganda efforts they are pushing forward. We are marching towards full-scale war. NATO has amassed 30,000 troops and 50 warships on Russia's border. Technically, it's in Norway. So likely the Baltic area, Kaliningrad, okay. Norway, I believe, does technically border Russia to the north, but that's how it's being reported. Call it what you want. I don't know exactly what part of the sea these warships are in. Do you think that right now, sending 30,000 troops and 50 warships for a war game is a coincidence? No, it's not. The Hill reports, U.S. Ukrainian officials brace for possible Russian chemical attack. Who do you believe? I think it's fair to say. Actually, I'll give you my personal opinion. Are there biolabs in Ukraine? Yes. Are they funded by the United States? Yes. Are they funding weapons research? That I don't know about. That I'm not entirely convinced. Saying that the funding is specifically weapons requires evidence we do not have. It's possible, sure. The U.S. is doing a lot of biological research in a lot of places, to be honest, and we don't know exactly what for. Could the biological threat reduction program be completely what they say it is? Yeah, and I tend to think the truth is closer. The simple solution, the solution that makes the least amount of assumptions. We don't need to make any assumptions. The U.S. is assisting even slightly with research involving pathogens. I believe the most likely scenario, even if only by a few percentage points, is that Ukraine is doing research on pathogens. It is not inherently in the space of militarization or weaponization. The U.S. is assisting in many ways. They've said they have been. Russia will exploit this. Absolutely. I don't trust Russia. I trust the U.S. more than I trust Russia. And I don't trust the U.S. all that much, if at all. But the least amount of assumptions we can make, the U.S. has funded some low-grade labs. They've asserted some of these, the U.S. has said they've built 2 BSL-2 labs, biosafety level 2 labs. These are typically not going to house weaponization programs because you want biosafety level 4. 2, kind of weak. There could be some pathogens in there, but you're likely not going to be experimenting with gain-of-function research or weapons like that. Maybe, but probably not likely. It's because of that, I think the U.S. is probably more so to be trusted. But unless we get hard documents and evidence, we won't know. And truth be told, you got to believe who you believe. And therein lies the big challenge. Is Russia going to engage in a chemical attack? Well, let's play this out. Why would they? Well, chemical attack wipes out their enemy combatants very, very quickly. It's powerful. Why would Russia do that? To gain a decisive victory over key areas of Kiev or other cities they're trying to control. Why wouldn't they do it? They don't need to. I mean, the issue with a chemical attack is, do you really need to? Kinetic weapons work well enough. And it would push the U.S. into war. I mean, take a look at this from CNBC. If Putin uses chemical weapons for Ukraine, it's a game changer for NATO. The clever thing for Putin to do is use just enough force to win, which means slow and steady, without giving NATO a casus belli. I'm probably pronouncing it wrong. But a cause for war, a justification of entering the war. And so long as Russia keeps doing what they're doing at this level, NATO seems not willing to get involved. But now you've got reports from the West that Russia could engage in a chemical attack. Well, let's play this one out. If Russia knows a chemical or biological weapons attack would pull in NATO, they'll avoid doing it because NATO's got no cause for war. NATO could respond with their own false flag, saying, we need to make it seem like Russia did this because we want to enter, otherwise Russia wins. Choose who you trust. I don't know. I'm not here to play nationalistic games. I'm not here to support Russia. I think Russia's lying about everything because they need a way to win and justify their war. We saw this story from ABC. March 11th, Russians reportedly bringing biochemical weapon suits into Ukraine, U.S. official says. What if he's telling the truth? It's fog of war, man. You decide for yourself. I honestly don't know. I really can't tell you what to believe. A senior administration official told ABC News Friday that the U.S. is getting reports that Russians are starting to bring in biochemical weapon suits into Ukraine. The reports come as Russians accuse Ukraine and the U.S. of developing biochemical weapons, which the U.S. has denied. We believe it is an ominous sign they are possibly doing it for cover. According to the official, as much as 1/5 of the Russian forces is currently inoperable, meaning they are either dead, wounded, or do not have the support or equipment needed to continue. But even though the Russians are bogged down, they realize that everything depends on taking Kiev and continue to put all that effort into that, according to the official. There are also concerns about boxing Putin in, as well as his consistent and casual mentions of nuclear weapons. According to the official, that is one of the reasons he has not been publicly labeled as a war criminal, because we just don't know what he will do. Interesting. Is Russia bringing in biochemical weapon suits to sort of make some kind of faux evidence that the U.S. and Ukraine are funding some kind of research? Oh, no, look at the suits we're bringing in. Oh, because there's something dangerous here. Are they bringing in the suits because they plan to use chemical weapons? Maybe. Maybe. It's a question I posed to a friend I mentioned in an earlier segment. Forgive me for repeating it if you're listening on the podcast, but why would Putin use chemical weapons and why would he attack civilians? Well, the issue isn't so simple. Sometimes civilians are used as shields in urban warfare. One side might build weapons or artillery or missile launchers or whatever in civilian areas like hospitals, knowing that if you attack them, they'll show a hospital on fire and say, see, well, look what you've done. Propaganda is everything. The reason why, to wrap it all back up to the view, the reason why we see them calling for Tulsi Gabbard and Tucker to be investigated, nay, arrested, is because they want to shut down information that could drive American sentiment against the United States' cause for war. If the U.S. really is preparing for some full-scale warfare, you got to make sure you have enough people who support it. Otherwise, you'll get social collapse. So, of course, The View steps it up. Do something. Shut these people down. They're evil. There's Russians. They are Russians because they need to control this. According to Rasmussen, will Russia use nukes in Ukraine? Most voters are concerned. They say the latest Rasmussen Reports national telephone and online survey finds that 77% of likely U.S. voters are concerned that Russia will use nuclear weapons in its invasion of Ukraine, including 41% who are very concerned. Only 38% of voters believe it is likely that Russia would use nuclear weapons to attack the United States, including 11% who think the attack is very likely. 52% don't think a Russian nuclear attack on the U.S. is likely, including 16% who say it is not at all likely. Another 10% are not sure. Now, I don't know. I'm not psychic. I have no idea. Would Russia use nukes? If they did, it would be something truly dramatic. I believe Russia would only use nukes if they're losing. I believe they'll only use nukes if NATO gets involved. I don't believe they'll use it on civilian populations directly, but the U.S. would absolutely frame it as though they did. That's war. If NATO has these 30,000 troops in Norway, not if they do, but if these troops and warships make their way to, say, Kaliningrad or Russian territory or even Ukraine, I would not be surprised if Russia uses tactical nuclear weapons or nuclear artillery. That is to say, don't imagine an ICBM flying through the stratosphere and then slamming towards the earth. I believe they explode above the earth in a massive mushroom cloud. Imagine artillery firing, kiloton bombs or, 500 kiloton bombs or gravity bombs, low-scale nuclear detonations, but still more powerful than what we've seen elsewhere. They've already been reported to have used thermobaric explosives, which basically create a vacuum, sucking the oxygen out of the area, which, it kills a lot of people. What would Russia be willing to do? I don't know. It seems like we're on a collision course. The scenario I often like to give people is, imagine you're walking through the forests. You're in the middle of the woods, hundreds of miles from civilization. You're lost. You're hungry. You have nothing but your weapon. You have a rifle, small bag with some food, and a small little canteen with some water. You don't know where your next meal will come from. You don't know where your next drink of water will come from outside of those resources you have. Off in the distance, you see a man walking towards you, also with a rifle, also with some food. You don't know who they are. What do? I give this scenario to a lot of people, and they tend to give me a lot of varied responses. But a lot of people like to play this noble effort of, I wave and say, hello, sir. Hey. This idea that you would see a stranger also lost in the middle of the woods, and your immediate reaction would be like, let's team up. All of a sudden, let's say you yell, you wave your hand. Hey. The person yells a word you don't understand. Garobsdo. And you're like, I don't know what that means. You don't speak the same language. You don't know what this person wants. You don't know where they come from. What do? It's easy to say, no, most people are good and we'd approach and find common ground. What if that person has no food? What if their canteen is empty and they see you with food and water and they think, I would rather kill than die? You don't know. And therein lies the challenge. We don't know what Putin really wants. That's why it's important for voices like Tucker or Tulsi to talk about, say, these biolabs or what they're saying. It's important to engage in these conversations. There's some prospect for peace here. Good news in that Ukraine seems to be they're slowly backing down because Russia is winning. Russia, I believe, is likely engaged in slow warfare to avoid giving NATO the justification for an invasion. But this means Russia will win in Ukraine. NATO is not going to like that. I don't know exactly what Russia wants. And that makes it challenging. The West, yes, and many of the left, the neocons and the new libs, will paint Putin as a comic book villain, a one-dimensional villain who just murders civilians because he's an evil despot. No, he certainly wants something. That's why negotiations are important. But if we can't understand, or we're unwilling to tolerate what he wants, war seems inevitable. The U.S., NATO, whatever, NATO countries, let's leave it at that, with 30,000 troops in Norway is absolutely a provocation. Recently, we heard that the U.S. was going to be halting a Minuteman III ICBM test out of fears it could cause escalation with Russia. But then they go and do this. The only logical solution is they now want an escalation with Russia. I think NATO will want Russia to attack first so they can claim the moral high ground. But what's the point? The reality is it doesn't matter who attacks first. So maybe it would be NATO. They need only have their propagandists and media personalities tell you what happened and you'll believe it, which is why they want Tucker Carlson off the air. It's why they want Tulsi Gabbard out of the picture. It's why they would go so far as to say arrest them. When the media comes out and says it's true, you believe it. Truth be told, I don't know that NATO has these troops near Russia's border. It's just been reported. I did watch a video of The View where they effectively called for the arrest of Tulsi and Tucker. I've seen reports about biochem suits, I've not seen them. And therein lies the challenge. We're constantly told things as part of a narrative, and why should we believe it? These are the same people that believed Jussie Smollett, or lied about the Covington kids, or lied about Kyle Rittenhouse, or lied about Ahmaud Arbery. The same people who lie to us every single day would then tell us to fall in line or else. So I dare say, when they come out now and tell you Tulsi Gabbard is wrong and pushing Putin's narrative, but then Tulsi backs up what she's saying with facts, who's really at fault here? I think Tulsi doesn't like intervention, obviously. I think she opposes the establishment, and they don't like her for it. Her and Tucker agree on a lot of things, but it's outside of policy. I mean, it's mostly foreign policy. Economically, Tulsi and Tucker are at odds. On gun rights, they're at odds. But the big issues right now, foreign policy, they seem to be in alignment. The establishment can't have that. I wonder if they'll come for my channel, they'll come for Timcast IRL. I wonder. I hope war doesn't escalate. I honestly, at this point, hope that Ukraine just bows out. Just finally gives in and says, what are your demands? Not that I want Ukraine to fall. I think Russia's evil at this point. But if it prevents World War III, at this point, we should be looking to take what we can get. I want to show you one last thing. I mentioned this in a previous segment too, so forgive me if it is, repetitious in a sense, repetitive. What's happening? No foreign biological laboratories operate in Ukraine, U.S. Embassy and Snopes say. Did Tulsi Gabbard mention foreign labs? No. What does foreign mean? There are biolabs in Ukraine. So why are they bringing up foreign labs? Operate in Ukraine? What does it mean to operate? The words they use are important because the reality is there are biolabs. There are many. In fact, I just showed you from defense.gov, there's 46 labs that have received assistance or funding from the U.S. So why are they lying? That I find to be very, very strange and disconcerting. But it shows you why they want to shut down Tucker and Tulsi. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up tonight at 8 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimcastIRL. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all then.